I previously showed you in the SwiftData course how to filter data. But what about if I told you there's an even better way? I've got your attention now, aren't I? In this video, we're going to look at how we can add groups to filter out items within our app, and I'll also show you how to write scalable code for managing different types of predicates. So let's get this money.
So there's a few improvements that I've actually made to the project, and that's so we can actually add in some of these new features. Now, I actually did do a video in this course about how to filter and sort, but to be honest with you, that was when SwiftData was quite early, and since time's gone on, there actually is a better way of handling filtering. The way I did it in the previous video isn't too bad, but when you're having to work with loads of data, it actually could possibly become a problem. So this method I'm about to show you is the most efficient way, in my opinion, to filter data. To actually handle, filtering data is by using your own component. So what we need to do is we need to build a component where if we pass it in some kind of, data, its only purpose will be to refresh and execute a query. So I'm going to build a new component whose only purpose is to execute queries that we tell it to. So in our project, let's create a new SwiftUI view called query item view. And then in order for us to actually do what we need to do, we're going to have to copy over some of the properties from our content view into this and tweak a few things. So I'm just going to copy over some properties, and to make my life easy, I'm going to put this side by side. So let's just do this now. And then the first thing I'm going to want is all of these. I'm going to want some environment properties and queries. Okay, cool. And that should complain because we need to import SwiftData. So we want our model context, items, to do items, and presenting our image viewer when you tap on an image. And then we're going to copy our entire list into here because we want our list so we can use the query property wrapper, or macro, I should say. So we're going to copy this. Cool. And I'm actually going to get rid of this navigation title in our content view because we're not going to need it no more. We'll replace filtered items with items because we want to use this. We're also going to want to cut our overlay and our sheet for editing and showing if there are no items. So I'm going to cut this, and then we're just going to paste this below our list. Cool. And then we're going to import our library SwiftUI image viewer like so. So now on our filtered items, we're going to replace that with items because we're going to be using this query here. Cool. Now I'm going to close this off. All right. So this is what we want. It's looking good. Well, the final thing we'll need to do is update our SwiftUI preview. Now I'm going to be using a component from a video again in this course where I showed you how to build your own custom SwiftUI preview component. And we're just going to use that here like so. And this is going to be query items view like so. Okay, cool. At this moment in time, when you're working with SwiftData, there's actually no way for you to dynamically update the query. So if you want to update the query dynamically, what you need to do is actually force the view to re-render, and then that will execute another query. So how can you do this? Well, we could do this by basically creating an initializer and passing in some data that this view would listen to. So if that data changes, this view would update. So in order to do that, we're going to need to create some kind of config so we can pass in a config that will change based on what that config is. It will fetch different types of data. So we're going to create a new Swift file called item query config. Okay, cool. And then inside of here, we're just going to start off by creating an enum, and that's just going to define one of the configurations. We're gonna have trust me, right? We're gonna have a KFC bucket full of them, right? But for now, we're just gonna start off with one. Don't worry about it. We're gonna get to the hot wings soon, yeah. But this is just a starter in it. So we're going to copy over, and we're just going to use this. So this enum is going to be our cases, and depending on what case you use, that will be the configuration for the predicate. So on this items query config, we're actually going to need a predicate to define what the view should execute. So we're going to create an extension on this enum and then define that configuration via a predicate. So you can see here we have a new function called filter that returns some kind of predicate for our item. And depending on what case it is, if it's search, we're going to first of all check to see if query has a value because it could be nil. If it does have a value, we'll filter out any items where the title contains that query, or else this will literally just return everything. So it will return all the items, so it doesn't do anything. So as you can see, this is quite nice and scalable because as we start to add more cases, we'll basically add in more basically rules and conditions for filtering out content with our predicate. Now, in order to, I said before that we need to cause our view to basically refresh with the new config. So that config in our case is this filter function. We need our view to refresh and use this function here. Now, in order to do that, we're going to need to create an initializer for this query item view. So we're going to pass in our, passing in a case from our enum. But what we want to do in here is we actually want to replace our query here. So we're going to assign it a new query, and that will cause the view to re-render. So in order to do that, we want to say self. We don't need to put self, but it's just a habit I have from the UI kit days. So you could do underscore if you wanted to. You don't need a self. But we're going to do self._items is equal to, and we can now just say init. And in the init, you'll see here that we have a filter. So if I just type out filter, cool, I can now just pass in our config.filter function from before. That's it. Now I'll get onto this in the end, towards the end, but one of the restrictions of using this technique is that you can actually do animations, and I'll break that down a bit more as we get further on in this video. So I'm just going to take this out. Cool. And now that we've added this new initializer, we should see that we'll get a complaint down here in our preview because it's expecting something. So let's just fix this. And we're now just going to say .search. And for now, I'm just going to put nil, so it builds. Okay, cool. So now we have this in place. I actually want to create like different variations of our SwiftUI preview so we can actually see this in action in terms of it working. So we'll have a nil one, but let's just create another one where based on our default to-dos, we'll actually search and see what it returns to us. So if I go to default to-dos.json, you'll see that we have we have two that start with the letter G. So I'm going to replace this with G, and we'll just see what happens. So if I just run the SwiftUI previews, so you'll see that on our second preview here, when we pass in the G, we're actually fetching all of the items, that start with that. But if I go to this one where we pass in nil, we just get all of the items. But what would happen if I was to pass it in just some, nonsense? So let's just say, some bullshit. You can see here on our third one, where we just pass in some nonsense, we actually don't get any kind of result. So this is working exactly how we want it to work. Now, I said before that we create a brand new view to show off different types of, to-dos and group them. And that was with our to-do group view. So if we just go to that screen here, you'll see that we have a grid here, and I actually do cover these lazy grids in a video in my SwiftUI for Beginners course, so you should definitely go and check that out. But basically, you have a grid here, and if you tap on an item, it should take us to that, filtered content. So we actually want this to be our root view, and when you tap on this, it will actually show you a list of items based on the filter. So our our root app. So we'll go to our to-dos app, and I'm going to replace this content view with our to-do group view like so. So that'll be the first thing you see when you launch the app. So if we just launch this now on a simulator, so you should see on a simulator that we have, this here, search for something here. We actually want to see, the to-dos filtered. So let's first of all just tackle showing our to-dos if we was to search on this screen directly. So on our to-do group view, if I was to just go to that, and we'll just dismiss this to give us some space. So let's go to our to-do group view. If we just get this running on a SwiftUI preview. Okay, cool. You'll see that we actually have this search bar, and we have this state property at the top called search query. So what we actually want to do is, depending on what someone has typed in, if this text empty or not. We want to either show the results for the query we want to execute, or alternatively, we want to switch between what you see on the screen based on what someone is typing in. Now, the best way to actually handle this would be to use some computer properties within this view to break up our groups view here and our view that will basically show our results. So if we just scroll down to the bottom of struct, what we're going to do here is we're going to create a new private extension, and then go down to do group view. And then I'm going to create two new computer properties in here for holding these views. So the first one is going to be search results view. It's just going to be some view like so. And then the next one will be our groups view. So right now, what will happen is that this will actually complain because it's expecting us to return something in these compute properties, which is fine. But I'm just going to tackle the group one first, and we're just going to cut this scroll view here and paste that in here like so. And then in our search results view, this is now where we're going to use our new view called items, well, query items view in here. Cool. Now the config we want to use is our search. And then the string here for our query is actually going to be our state property. So it's going to be our search query like so. Okay, cool. So we're not actually using either one of these computer properties just yet. But what we do want to do is actually use an if statement here and say if search query is empty, then we'll show our groups view. Or else, if it's not empty, so someone's typed something in, we'll show our search results view like so. Cool. Now, if I was to start typing in at this moment in time, we're actually going to get an issue because what should happen is that this should now not work. So it won't work. And the reason why is because we've not actually loaded any kind of to-dos in there. So let's just update our previews and put in some dummy data. So in our first preview here, we have our preview container, but this is actually empty, but our second one should have some items. So if I also go into this second one and type in G, it's really annoying that I don't know why the SwiftUI preview does that sometimes. So SwiftUI preview is being funny on me, man. But what we'll do instead is we'll just run this and see what happens. So if I was just type in here G, you'll now see that we see our items query view that we defined before, and it's filtering out and showing us all of our to-dos that were pre-filled starting with G. If I also just keep typing and just put in some nonsense, you'll see here that it shows us the empty screen in our items query view as well. And when I clear the search view, it goes back to our group view. So we're handling that pretty well. So that's all good. So we essentially have, filtering on our group view initially sorted and boxed off, which is great. Now, in the next part of this video, we'll actually be looking at how we can actually build our screen here, where if you tap on it, it will actually go and do a different type of filter. And I'll show you how to actually, build a scalable way of handling this for different types of filter, which is really cool. So make sure you stick around for that. But if you're enjoying this video, feel free to actually watch the rest of the videos in this free SwiftData course. You can actually see it on the screen here. And I'd really appreciate it if you gave this video a thumbs up and you subscribe to the channel as well. And leave a comment as well, man. I like talking to all of you, man. You know what I mean? We're boys and girls around here. So looking at our app, like I said before, we want to handle it now where if you tap on one of the groups, it navigates to a screen. But right now, we don't actually have that in place. So we're going to need to add in some additional code and use the new navigation APIs introduced in in not last year's dub, the year before that. And again, I might as well just tattoo this on my forehead, man. But yes, I have a course for navigation as well, so you can see that on the screen too. So make sure you definitely check that out. But we're going to want to wrap our group items here in a navigation link and then use that link to help us navigate to this new screen, which will be our content view. So let's just scroll down here. And where we have our to-do group item, we're now going to wrap that in a navigation link. Now the value here is going to be our enum. So we're going to use our config that we had before to help us navigate to this screen. So we're just going to say here, item query config.search. And then for now, we're just going to mark this as nil. And then for the label, we're just going to pass in our to-do group item view. Now, if I build this, I should get an error. And the reason why is because when you're using navigation link, you actually need the value to be hashable, which our enum isn't. So we go into our enum, we just need to mark this with hashable. And then now if I build the project, you should see that the error goes away, which is what we want. Now, one thing you will see is that these buttons now will be highlighted. And the reason why is because it's in a list type. So to get rid of that, on our navigation link, we can just say button style and then set that to dot plain, and that should now go back to what it was before, which is all good. Done that, the next thing we need to do is we actually want to add in a navigation destination for. So on here, on our scroll view, we're going to say dot navigation destination for, and then the type it's going to listen to is our enum. So it's going to be our items query config.self, and then this destination here will have a hashable value. We'll just say config, and then we'll just pass in that config to our content view. So we're going to say content view for now. So right now our content view doesn't accept anything, but let me just create some space and remove this. So right now our content view doesn't actually accept the config, but we'll make some changes later on so it actually does. So this actually isn't going to work at all. And the reason why this navigation destination won't work is because right now it's not within a navigation stack. So our scroll view needs to be in a navigation stack. Now, the only problem is that our content view, if we click into it, has a navigation stack already. So we essentially need to take this out. So I'm going to remove the navigation stack from there. And then we'll go back into our view here, and then we'll embed this scroll view in a navigation stack. So we'll go say navigation stack, and then we'll just close that off. Cool. So it's super important that when you're doing this, the scroll view is embedded, you know, within the navigation stack, and the navigation destination is on the scroll view. If this is outside of here, this won't work. So back in our content view, what we essentially want to use this for is to help us re-render, to push to a screen and show that items query with the config that we pass it. So we're going to need to actually remove some code in this file. So all the code that we had before for our list and filtered is going to go. So I'm going to delete this, and I'm also going to delete our list as well and our animation. And I'm going to replace this with our query items view that accepts a config. And we'll just create an instance. We'll just create an init where you can actually pass in a config. Like so. And then you can store that in some kind of constant for now. Okay, cool. So there's a few properties that we want to get rid of here. So we want to get rid of our to-do edit. We want to get rid of this. And we also want to get rid of this query as well. All right, cool. So we just now want to fix our errors that we have on this screen. So this delete item in here, do we need this anymore? So no, we don't need this. So this can go as well. That means that we don't need this model context either. Okay, cool. And then now in our SwiftUI preview, we just want to update this to now use the new config. So let's do that now. Allowing us to pass in a config to the content view. So if I just run this on the SwiftUI preview, let's see what happens. And we get a build failure. And that's because back in our to-do group view, it's now expecting us to actually pass in some kind of config. So all we literally just need to do is just pass it in this here. So we'll just say config, like so. And then we can actually test this out. So let's go to here. And you'll see that it passes onto the screen. And that is working in terms of navigation. Now this flickering with this toolbar is 100% an Apple thing, because it wasn't happening like this on the previous Xcode beta. So yeah, that's one for Apple to look into, man. But in terms of navigation, we do navigate to the screen and it's kind of doing what it is that we want, which is pretty decent. So the only thing I want to do now is when we navigate to that screen, I just want to show the search as a title. So in our items query config, I'm going to create another computer property here so we can give each type of, config its own title. We'll just create a new computer property called search. And then back in our to-do group view, before we navigate, we're just going to say dot navigation title is equal to config dot title, like so. Okay, cool. And then now you'll see when we tap on it, it takes us to this screen. So we can see the title search. So this is working fine, bar this bug by Apple. Okay, cool. So far we've only looked at handling just the one, which is search. But what about if I want to handle each one of these configurations? Now in our item query config, I'm going to add a whole bunch of new cases here for handling those different types of groups. So you can see here that we've now got our groups here and they all accept a query, which is optional. So you don't have to search for something, but that's gonna give us a bunch of errors here for the title and the filter. Now I'm just going to fill out this and then we'll examine it in a bit. So you can see here that for each case, we're now basically returning a title and we need to do a similar thing for our filter. So for each one of these cases, we're going to need to write a predicate. Now I'm not going to sit here and do that for the entire video. I'll just do it and then we'll break it down. So you can see here now that as we've got our cases here. So we've got our today with our query predicate where we're checking the time. We've got our upcoming where it's working with time again. All, it's just getting all of them where that it's not archived. So you can see that we've got quite a few different types of predicates based on what group it is that you're going to be working on. So it's quite, flexible there. So you can see how it can nicely grow as well, in my opinion. It's like having a nice, if you ever work with Moyo, it's like having a config and you can just see what the configuration is for each case, which is what I like about this. So one thing that you will see that I did on purpose is that when you're actually checking for stuff like, enums, for example, or if you're basically checking for values like enums and whatnot, you can't really use it directly in the actual predicate yet. I don't think this is supported. So to get around this, you have to actually define the value outside of the predicate. Now this enum here, we can't use the actual enum value in SwiftData to filter. So you have to save like a representation of it. So either int, string, whatever it may be. So you define it outside and then you can basically do the comparison within the predicate. It's one of those gotchas with SwiftData, but it's not obvious, but this is how you get around it if you try to use enums. Final thing we need to do is update our model because within each one of our models, when we're looping through them in the list, we want to associate some kind of config with it. So you can just pass it through to the next screen. So our model here is our to-do group, and we want to add a new parameter here called config, which will be items query config, and this should complain in our model. So I'll update our model now. So you can see here that we have our property here root with our query config, and then each root has its own case which will define the filter when it gets passed on to the items query screen, which is exactly what we want. So back in our navigation link in our to-do group view, so if we just go to our navigation link, we don't always want this to now be search, and we actually want this to be based on the group's root. So we're going to change this now here for our navigation link to be group.root, and this will use the config that we defined in our model. So let's just run this again in our preview just to see this in action. And if I go to all, I'll now see all my items, which is what I want. If I go to completed, I should only see my complete item, which is what I want. If I go to critical, we are now only see our critical items, which is the ones marked here, and so on and so forth. Now, I'm not gonna go through all of these, but you can see how the filters are all kind of working. Now, if I go into the all screen, you'll see that when we go to all, we actually also have a search bar here. So we can actually search for items on the screen as well. Now, right now, if you do that, nothing will happen. So what we need to do is we kind of need to force the view to also update itself as well. Now, in order to do that, we're going to need to go into our content view, and where we have our config, we need this config to basically force a redraw. So how can we do that? Well, this items query config is a enum, and if you didn't know this, enums are they're basically value types as well. So we can actually write a function for it to update itself. And by updating itself, it will cause the view to redraw, which is what we want. Back in our view, for our content view, we're going to change this to be a state variable. So this view can track changes to what's going on with this config. So rather than, so this will be private, but we'll say state, and it'll be var. And we should now get a error here because you can't assign it. So we're going to change this to be underscore, and then we'll init it. But when we init it, we'll give it an initial value of config. So that'll be its initial value. Cool. So we want to track changes to our search query within this, view. So we can actually use the onChange modifier. So after our searchable, I'm just going to say dot onChange of config. And then this will give me the old and new value. Now I'm only really interested in the new value, but within here, we want to call a function to update this query config. So the case will still be the same. It's just that the value and the associated type will be different. So in order to do that, we need to go into our items query config, and then we're going to need to create a function in here called update. So you can see here that all we're literally doing is that we're updating itself to be the same enum case, but the only thing that will change is the associated value, which is the enum's associated value. So the reason why I'm using mutating here is because this is actually a value type, and in order to change itself, you need to mark the function as mutating. So we need to call this function now in our onChange. So we're just simply going to say on our config.update query with the new value. So this will be the new value here. I just had a dirt moment. We don't want to listen to onChange of the config. We want to listen to onChange of the search query. So it's going to be search query here actually, not config. And then this is going to be new value. All right, cool. So we want to listen to this changing, which is our search field, and then update. All right, cool. What we'll actually do is make a small improvement, and we'll say if the new value, we'll just do it on the line here. So we'll just say new value is empty. Then we'll just pass in nil, or else we'll pass in the new val, and then query. Actually, let's just change to query. Cool. So essentially, if you type in the search bar and there's nothing in it, then we'll just fetch everything, because we're passing in nil. Or else we'll use what you've actually typed in to try and search for something. Test this out. We're gonna go to our to-do group view, and here where we have some pre-filled items, I'm gonna go to all, and then I'm just going to type in here G. Oh yeah, SwiftUI previews, man, it's not working. So let's actually just run this on a device because for some reason my keyboard ain't working in the previews. So let's go to all. Let's take out its breakpoint. And then now, if I just type in here G, you'll see that I get the G. Go visit, yep. And then if I type in S, I'm seeing Sangria. If I put in some nonsense, you'll see that it's not working there. And then I can hit cancel and I can go back to previous categories. So this is exactly what I want, right? Cool. Now, another thing we could do is that right now we're actually not able to search on items where they have a, category associated to them. So what I want to do is I want to search for not only just a title, but also a title for a category too. So you can find it in two ways. So in order to do that, we can actually dynamically filter on relationships as well as just on the item too. So we go to our config where we had all of our filters. I'm going to scroll down. And wherever we search for the title contains, we're also going to add in another or here to basically check to see if the relationships category title also contains this query. So let me do that now. So essentially we're saying the title contains the query, or if the category title contains this query is equal to true. And the reason why is because we're checking for true explicitly here is because this is optional. It'll return it to us. So we need to replace all instances of our title contains with this new check. So to make my life easier, I'm just going to do a find and replace. So now that's been replaced, let's just run this again. And now that I've run this, if we just go to all, now this has family as a tag. So what I'm actually going to do instead of this is I'm going to create a new category, and we'll just call it something like what's a good name? Let's call it live. All right, cool, dismiss. And I'm just going to update this to now use live update. Right, cool. And let's actually just search for life now and see what happens. So if I just search here for life, you'll see that actually pops up with the item that's in the category of life. And if I search for go visit, I can see both of them. So that's working. And if I was to go back and try the exact same thing here, our search bar's gone here. So let's go back here. And I think it might be because I've not attached this searchable onto a navigation stack. So let's cut that and I'll put that on a navigation stack here. And we can now see our search bar here. Cool. So let's just run this again and see what happens. Cool. And if I search here for life, you can see that it's popping up. So this is all working how we go visit. This is how all working how we expected. So now we've got searching, filtering, we've got a whole bunch of stuff, man. I told you, man, we're gonna get a KFC variety bucket of things here, man. So it's all good and well, right? You know, that we've done this, but that doesn't mean that SwiftData is perfect. So there are some limitations at the time of this recording for you to be aware of when you're doing dynamic filtering. Now, some of these are enums aren't really supported yet when you want to do any filtering, so you can't use enums. Also, you can't use regular expressions, so you can't use Swift regex, as well as you can't do compound and complex queries as well, like you would with like clauses and all that kind of stuff. It doesn't exist yet. You can't use transformable. So if you use transformable when you're trying to do dynamic filtering, trust me, you're just going to get gray hairs, man. It's going to be stressful for you. Yeah, you can't use it. And you also cannot animate changes in your view. And the reason why is because code that we actually wrote is technically re-rendering a brand new view. So when SwiftUI is trying to figure out the changes, there's technically nothing to animate because it's a brand new view. So you can't animate it right now. Hopefully, Apple allows us to update the query using the actual query property wrapper, and that would allow you to animate changes. But until now, you're not gonna get animations. So that's everything in this video. If you want to learn more about SwiftData, I do have a free course on my channel. Like I said before, there's a playlist alongside a whole bunch of other content on my channel that you can check out. That's everything from me. I'll catch you on a bit. Deuces.